My name is Clara. I'm 21 years old, and every single thing I have in my life I built from scratch. Every dollar, every success, every small step forward was carved out with my own two hands. And that's a life my family was about to demand I set on fire for their sake. It all came to a head at what I now call the Last Supper. The air in the dining room was thick and suffocating, the way it always was before my parents were about to ask for something. That's when my father cleared his throat and delivered the line that would shatter my world. "Clara," he said, not even looking at me, "we've decided. You need to quit your job and go work for your brother. Unpaid, of course." I just stared at him. The fork in my hand felt impossibly heavy. "No," was all I could manage to say. It was a small word, but it was a declaration of war. My father's face hardened. His voice dropped, becoming cold and sharp. "His future is the family's future," he spat. "Your education can wait, but your brother's opportunity cannot." And right then, something inside me didn't break. It froze. A strange glacial calm washed over me. I looked him dead in the eye, picked up my phone from the table, and said, "You just made my decision for me." I sent a single text. They thought I was being dramatic. They had no idea that with that one message, I had just erased them from my life. What came next was a reckoning they never, ever saw coming. Have you ever been the one who was expected to sacrifice everything for someone else's dream? If you have, stick around and subscribe, because this is the story of how I took my future back. To understand how we got to that table, you have to understand that in my family, there were always two paths. Mine was paved with sweat. My brother Kevin's was paved with, well, nothing. It just sort of appeared in front of him, courtesy of our parents. I got my first job the week I turned 16 at a greasy spoon diner called The Corner Booth. I can still smell it. A mix of stale coffee, sizzling bacon, and the lemony scent of industrial-strength cleaner. My feet ached from 8-hour shifts, my apron was perpetually stained, but I remember my first paycheck like it was a holy relic. $150. It felt like a million. I walked straight to the bank, my hands trembling slightly as I pushed the crisp bills under the teller's window. "For my college fund," I said, my voice filled with a pride so fierce it almost hurt. I was building my future, one double shift at a time. A few months later, on Kevin's 17th birthday, he walked out the front door to find a brand new, cherry red sedan with a giant bow on it. He didn't have a job. He didn't have a dime in savings. He just existed. He grinned, tossed his hair out of his eyes, and called it his Idea Mobile. A vehicle to transport his genius from one place to another. While I was scrubbing ketchup off tables, he was joyriding. That was just how it was. Our entire childhood was like that. This double standard bled into everything, even our schoolwork. I remember in 10th grade, I worked for a month on a huge history project. I built a diorama, wrote a 20-page paper, and memorized a 10-minute presentation. I got an A+, and when I showed my parents, my dad glanced at it for a second and said, "Good job, kiddo. See? Hard work pays off." It was a pat on the head, nothing more. 2 weeks later, Kevin, who hadn't turned in a single assignment for his art class, presented his final project. A single, lopsided clay pot he'd made in a last-minute panic. He called it a deconstruction of modern domesticity. My parents framed it. They put it on the mantelpiece and called him their little artist, their free thinker who couldn't be constrained by deadlines. My A+ was an expectation that was noted and forgotten. His C- was a sign of misunderstood genius that was celebrated and displayed for all to see. It taught me a very clear lesson. The value of my effort would always be measured differently from the value of his existence. I had a chore list on the fridge that was a mile long, each task earning me a quarter. Kevin's only chore, his only expectation, was to go to his room and brainstorm. That was the word they used. He wasn't being lazy, he was ideating. One day, after I'd spent all Saturday cleaning out the garage, my mom found me looking exhausted at the kitchen table. She put her hand on my shoulder, her voice soft and full of what I used to think was love. "Clara, honey, I know it's hard. she said, "but you're so responsible and grounded. Kevin, he's the visionary. We need your stability to support his genius." She said it like it was the most natural thing in the world. She wasn't asking me to be a support beam. She was telling me that's what I was born to be. But I had my secret weapon, the college fund. Once a month, I would log into the online banking portal. It was my ritual. I'd watch the balance tick up. 5,000, 15, 30. It was more than just money. It was proof. Proof that my work mattered. That I was building a fortress for my future, one that nobody could touch. It was a sacred promise, not just from my parents, but from the universe. I was earning my escape. I just didn't realize that while I was building my fortress brick by brick, my family was busy tunneling out the foundation from underneath. The first crack in my fortress appeared when Kevin turned 19. He announced, with the gravity of a man unveiling a cure for cancer, his first startup, Gourmet Paws. It was a subscription box for artisanal, organic, gluten-free dog treats. Our parents were mesmerized. My dad started calling him the next Steve Jobs. My mom would clasp her hands together and say things like, "He just sees the world differently." I saw a spoiled kid who thought dogs cared about kale. A week later, I was walking past my parents' bedroom and heard them whispering. The words hung in the air like poison. Seed money. Significant investment. And then, the phrase that made my blood run cold. Just have to dip into the family education fund for a bit. I walked right in. My heart was hammering against my ribs. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "What education fund?" My dad didn't even flinch. He gave me this condescending little smile and said, "It's our savings, Clara. We're just moving some assets around." It was a lie. A bald-faced, soul-crushing lie. That account had my name on it. It had my diner money in it. But when I tried to argue, my mom just waved her hand dismissively. "Don't be so dramatic. It's for your brother." Gourmet Paws was dead in 4 months. Kevin spent most of the seed money on a ridiculously slick logo, custom-printed boxes that probably cost more than the treats inside, and a launch party for his friends. When he officially had 0 subscribers, he blamed the uneducated consumer base who just didn't appreciate canine culinary art. And the consequences for blowing thousands of dollars? Absolutely none. He got a pat on the back for trying. I tried to be rational with them about Gourmet Paws. One evening, I found a receipt for a brand consultation package for over $2,000. $2,000? I asked my mom, trying to keep my voice steady. "For what?" "A logo." She snatched the receipt from my hand. "It's not just a logo, Clara. It's about creating a lifestyle brand. Kevin is thinking big picture." I pointed out that he hadn't sold a single treat, that his entire inventory was getting stale in our garage. "Maybe if you were more supportive, he'd feel more motivated," she snapped, her voice cold. "Your negativity isn't helping anyone. It was my fault. His failure to launch a ludicrous business was somehow my fault because I was the only one tethered to reality." After that, I stopped questioning the expenses. It was pointless. I was just the family accountant, the boring naysayer who didn't understand vision. They didn't want my opinion, they wanted my silence and, as it turned out, my savings. You'd think they would have learned. You'd be wrong. 6 months later, it was pixel perfect, a brilliant venture to sell phone cases with your face printed on them. This time, he needed a state-of-the-art 3D printer that cost more than my first car would have. I checked the college fund statement online. Another $5,000, gone. When I confronted them, my dad called it a temporary loan to the family's emerging tech portfolio. He was starting to sound like a brochure for a pyramid scheme. That's when the dread started. It was a cold, heavy knot that lived permanently in my stomach. I'd bring up scheduling campus tours, and my mom would suddenly remember she needed to iron the curtains. I'd show my dad a university prospectus, and he'd immediately get an important phone call. They were avoiding it, avoiding me. They were hiding something. The fortress I'd been building for years suddenly felt like it was made of sand, and I could hear the tide coming in. The dread followed me for months, a constant shadow, but eventually the time for avoidance ran out. It was here, application season, my Super Bowl. I had the financial aid forms for my dream university spread across my desk like a sacred text. I'd filled out every line, double-checked every box. All I needed was one last piece of the puzzle, an official statement for my college fund. I asked my mom for it first. She suddenly had to take a very important call in the other room. I asked my dad. He told me he'd get to it later, that he was busy. The excuses were so flimsy, so transparent, it was insulting. And that's when I knew. I couldn't trust them to give me the truth. I had to go get it myself. I walked to the bank. Every step felt like I was wading through wet concrete, but a tiny, stupid flicker of hope kept me going. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe the money was there, safe and sound, waiting for me. I felt a weird mix of excitement and sheer terror as I stood in line, my palms sweating. I finally got to the teller, a kind-looking woman with a polite smile. I gave her my account number. "I just need a printout of the current balance, please," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally high. She tapped a few keys and the printer next to her whirred to life. She handed me the single sheet of paper. It was still warm. My eyes immediately dropped to the bottom line, searching for that beautiful number. My brain was braced for something over $40,000. I saw the dollar sign, and then I saw the number. 67,000, 67,000. The air just vanished from my lungs. It felt like a physical blow. The teller's polite chatter faded into a dull underwater hum. The fluorescent lights of the bank suddenly seemed blindingly bright, and I had to grip the marble countertop to keep my knees from buckling. Was this a mistake? Some kind of sick joke? It had to be. It just had to be. I numbly folded the paper, stuffed it in my pocket, and walked out of the bank like a zombie. I didn't scream when I got home. I didn't cry. I think I was beyond that. I was in this strange, cold, silent place of pure shock. I waited until my parents were both sitting at the kitchen table. I walked over, pulled the folded statement from my pocket, and slid it onto the center of the table between them. The silence was deafening. My mother looked at it, and her face just crumpled. Tears started streaming down her cheeks. "We were going to pay it back, Clara, I swear," she whimpered. "It was just a loan." But my father, he didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He just stared at the paper, then at me, and crossed his arms defiantly over his chest. His voice was completely void of emotion. "It was an investment," he said, as if explaining a simple business transaction. "An investment in your brother. An investment in this family." And in that moment, I understood. They hadn't just stolen my money, they felt they were entitled to it. The betrayal wasn't just a crack in the foundation, it was a sinkhole that swallowed my entire world. The days that followed the discovery were a special kind of hell. I existed in a state of hollow shock, walking through a house that no longer felt like my home. But my grief wasn't met with comfort or apologies. It was treated like an annoying stain they couldn't scrub out. If my mother found me crying quietly in my room, she'd let out a heavy, theatrical sigh and say, "Oh, Clara, are we still doing this?" My anger, the righteous, burning anger that I was so entitled to, was dismissed as me being ungrateful. After all they'd done for me. It was breathtaking. The most infuriating part was how they made Kevin's needs an emergency that always took priority. The week of my community college entrance exams, I had my textbooks and notes spread out over the kitchen table every night. I was determined to ace them. One night, my father walked in, looking flustered. "Clara, pack all this up, now." I was confused. "Why? I'm in the middle of studying." He sighed, like my studying was a massive inconvenience to him. "Kevin's laptop just died. He's in the middle of a creative breakthrough for his new app, and he's lost everything. I need to use the table to try and fix it." He wasn't asking, he was telling. When I protested, pointing out I had an exam in 2 days, he looked at me with genuine disbelief. "Clara, this is your brother's career. Your little test can be retaken. This moment of inspiration is fleeting." I had to pack up my entire future and retreat to my bedroom floor, so my father could spend 4 hours watching YouTube videos on how to fix a laptop, a problem Kevin had caused by spilling a soda on it. The message was clear. My hard-earned opportunities were disposable, while his careless mistakes were critical emergencies. Then came the campaign of guilt, and its main weapon was the twisted compliment. "You're so strong, Clara," my mom would say, patting my arm with a pitying look. "You'll land on your feet, I know you will. It's Kevin we're worried about. He's so sensitive, he feels these business pressures so deeply." My strength wasn't a virtue, it was an excuse. It was the justification for their neglect. What she was really saying was, "You're strong enough to handle our abuse. Your brother isn't." My dad's approach was less subtle. He'd see my devastated face and scoff. "Don't be so upset about the money," he told me one night, his voice dripping with condescension. "Try to think of the stress your brother is under. He's trying to build a future for all of us." They had successfully twisted the narrative in their heads. In their version of reality, Kevin was the brave pioneer, and I was the selfish brat complaining about the cost of the expedition. And any time I tried to bring up the raw, gaping wound of their betrayal, the conversation was immediately shut down with the ultimate manipulation card. "But we're family." They'd say it with such conviction, as if that one word erased everything. Families are supposed to sacrifice for each other. It was their mantra, their get-out-of-jail-free card. But we all knew what it really meant. It meant Clara was supposed to sacrifice for them. So I stopped talking. I retreated into myself. The house was suffocating, so I found my escape where it all began. The corner booth. I picked up every extra shift I could. Double on Friday, the weekend brunch rush, closing on Tuesday. The exhaustion was a blessing. The ache in my feet was a welcome distraction from the ache in my heart, and I started saving again. But this time, it wasn't for a university. It wasn't for a dream they could touch. This time, I was saving for an escape. This money was mine, and they would never even know it existed. Just when I thought they had taken everything they possibly could, Kevin announced his masterpiece, his magnum opus. He called it Connectopause. According to him, it was a revolutionary, blockchain-based, hyper-local social networking platform exclusively for pets. It was the most gloriously nonsensical string of buzzwords I had ever heard. A social network for dogs who couldn't read, built on a technology none of them understood. My parents, however, looked at him like he had just solved world hunger. This was it. This was the one that would make them all rich and prove his genius to the world. There was just one problem. They were broke, completely tapped out. The college fund was gone. Their savings were gone. There was no more money to throw at Kevin's fantasies. For a brief, naive moment, I thought that might be the end of it. But I had severely underestimated their twisted creativity. They had run out of money to give him, so they decided to give him the next best thing, me. My time, my labor, my entire life. It started with my mom announcing a special family meeting. Her voice was unnaturally cheerful. "We have the most wonderful news, Clara. A surprise," she chirped. As I walked into the living room, the scene felt like an ambush. My father was sitting in his armchair, a smug smile on his face. Kevin was lounging on the couch, looking like a king waiting for his subjects. The air was thick with a false, cloying sincerity. My stomach tightened. This wasn't a meeting, it was a sentencing. My father began, his voice booming with fake enthusiasm. He unveiled what he called their brilliant solution to Kevin's staffing problems. "We've decided," he announced, as if it were a royal decree, "that you, Clara, are going to be a part of this incredible journey. You're going to quit that dead-end diner job and your little college classes, and you're going to become Kevin's new operations manager." He paused, beaming, waiting for me to burst into tears of gratitude. I just stared, speechless. He wasn't done. "Think of it," he boomed. "A priceless internship at the ground floor of a major tech startup. The experience will be worth more than any degree." My mom chimed in, her voice dripping with poisonously sweet logic. "He needs someone he can trust, honey. Someone who will be dedicated. It's the perfect arrangement." And that was it. The final, unimaginable insult. They hadn't just stolen my past by draining my savings. Now, they were standing here, with proud smiles on their faces, demanding that I hand over my present and my entire future. Not as a request, not as a favor, but as an obligation. They weren't asking for my help. They were demanding my total and complete sacrifice on the altar of my brother's ego. And it was that demand, that breathtaking, soul-crushing entitlement, that led us right to that dinner table. It was the final straw that didn't just break my back, it turned my spine to steel. So there we were, at the table. The demand hanging in the air like poison gas. Quit my life to become my brother's unpaid servant. And the word that fell from my lips was quiet, but it was the heaviest thing in the room. No. The effect was instantaneous. My mother's face went pale, her hands fluttering at her throat as she started her panicked pleading. "Clara, please, just think about it." Kevin let out an entitled scoff, a little puff of air that said, "How dare you?" And my father, his face turned to granite. His voice was cold, sharp, and it sliced right through me, delivering the killing blow. "His future is the family's future. Your education can wait, but your brother's opportunity cannot." And in that instant, something inside me didn't break. It died. Every last shred of hope that they would ever see me. Every ounce of love I felt. Every chain of obligation that had bound me to them my entire life. It all just evaporated. And in its place was a terrifying, ice-cold clarity. I saw them for what they were. Not a family. A parasitic organism. An organism that had been feeding on my dreams, my work, and my future to sustain its favored child. And I realized there was nothing left to fight for. The war was over because I was finally laying down my arms and walking off the battlefield. I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. No screaming, no crying, that was all over. I calmly pushed my chair back, stood up, and walked to my room. They stared, silent and confused by my lack of hysterics. Under my bed was a duffel bag I'd packed a week ago, a silent admission that I knew this day was coming. I methodically added my toothbrush, my laptop charger, and the small stash of cash from the diner. Nothing sentimental, nothing that tied me to this house. My phone buzzed. It was my best friend, Maya, with a simple text. "You okay?" I pressed call. She answered on the first ring. My voice was steady, almost robotic. "Can you come get me?" Maya didn't ask why. She didn't ask what happened. She just said, "Give me 10 minutes." That simple, unconditional support, that absolute trust, was all the validation I needed in the entire world. I zipped the duffel bag, slung it over my shoulder, and walked back into the living room. My parents and brother were still sitting there, their faces a mixture of shock and outrage, utterly baffled by my calm defiance. They were waiting for me to engage, to argue, to give them a fight they could win. I gave them nothing. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't say another word. I just walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped out into the night. I didn't look back as Maya's car pulled up to the curb, her headlights cutting through the darkness. The click of the front door locking behind me was the single greatest sound I have ever heard. 3. For 6 months there was silence. I worked, I studied, I slept in the quiet little room I rented, and I breathed free air for the first time in my life. And then, one Tuesday night, my phone lit up. It was a string of frantic texts from my mother. The messages painted a grim, pathetic picture. Connectipause, predictably, had been a spectacular failure. To fund it, my father had taken out a high-interest, second mortgage on the house. Now the bills were due. The bank was calling. They were facing foreclosure. The texts became more and more desperate, a waterfall of guilt and panic. "We're your family, Clara. You can't let this happen. Kevin is devastated. We need your help. We need money." I read the messages, one after another. I felt a flicker of something not quite pity, more like the ghost of an old connection fading away. I thought about the $40,000. I thought about the years of work. I thought about my father's cold, defiant face as he told me my future could wait. I took a deep breath, held my thumb over her contact, and pressed block. Then I did the same for my father and my brother. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of hygiene. That night, I sat at my small desk, a textbook on microeconomics open in front of me, a cup of cheap coffee steaming by my side. I was paying my own way through community college, working 2 part-time jobs to make it happen. I was exhausted, bone-tired in a way I'd never been before. But for the first time, it was my exhaustion. It belonged to me. It was the product of my choices, my work, my dream. It wasn't a loud, joyful freedom. It was a quiet, profound stillness. The silence in my little room wasn't empty. It was full of potential. It was the sound of my own life, finally beginning. My found family was small, but they were mighty. It was Maya and her mom, who insisted I come over for dinner at least twice a week. One night, we were celebrating. I'd gotten a 4 gigapascals on my first midterms. We were eating cheap pizza straight from the box, laughing so hard that soda came out of my nose. Maya's mom, a woman who had only known me for a few months, grabbed my hand and said, "We are so incredibly proud of you, Clara. Look at everything you've done." And those simple, genuine words gave me something my own family never had, the feeling of being truly seen. At college, something clicked. I discovered a passion for digital marketing, the real kind, built on data and strategy, not blockchain for dogs. One of my professors, a sharp, no-nonsense woman, saw my drive. She saw me staying late, asking questions, doing the work. She didn't know my story, she only knew my results. She recommended me for a paid internship at a local tech firm. I got the job. Not because of who my family was, but because of who I was. It was a success that was mine and mine alone. That internship was the launching pad for everything. I wasn't just a coffee runner, I was a sponge. I stayed late. I learned about SEO, analytics, and content strategy. I built entire campaigns that got real results for our clients. 6 months into it, my boss called me into her office. I was terrified I'd done something wrong. Instead, she offered me a full-time, salaried position as a junior marketing strategist. It came with benefits. It came with a real future. I remember walking out of that office and just sitting in my car, crying. But these were not the tears of grief and betrayal I had shed in my parents' house. These were tears of overwhelming, unbelievable joy. I had done it, on my own. That first real paycheck felt 100 times more valuable than the $40,000 in that old account ever could have. A few of us from work went out to celebrate that Friday. As I sat there, laughing with my new friends, my real colleagues, I realized I hadn't just found a job. I was building a new life, a new circle, a true found family built on mutual respect and shared success, not on obligation and sacrifice. Looking back, my family didn't actually steal my future. They just stole the blueprint for a life I thought I was supposed to want. Losing that money, losing them, it felt like the end of the world. But it wasn't. It was the beginning. It forced me to find a strength I never knew I had, to draw my own map, and to build a life that was authentically, unapologetically mine. They thought they were burying me under the weight of their expectations and my brother's failures. They never realized they were just planting a seed. So, if you're out there, feeling buried, remember that. Thank you for listening to my story. And if you want to hear more stories about taking back your power, make sure you subscribe to the channel.